Here's the reality: women being told they're normal and yet they're suffering. When you know something is off, but every test says you're fine, it's enough to make you question your sanity. But there is a test that can save your sanity by giving you clear answers. Hello and welcome to the Feel Better, Feel Great podcast episode, the hormone test that can save your sanity. Remember, in each episode, I'm offering you holistic health and functional medicine information to empower you with the knowledge that you need to lead a healthier, happier life. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea McSwain. If you're new to me, please like, subscribe, and click the bell for this channel. That way you can get all the updates because there's lots more to come. And please remember, this is education only. And if you are working with a healthcare provider, that's very important, right? Because you want to be able to apply what I'm talking about and work with someone on your conditions and health objectives. Cool. So let's get into this. All right. Oh, so first of all, you're not crazy, right? That's the point. I tell people that all the time because things are happening and you're trying to get answers, right? And so, what happens? Well, you go to the system that you can get into easily or possibly, right? Which is your doctor, right? You go to your doctor or your healthcare provider, and so often you're shunted to a nurse practitioner or physician assistant. Um, Sometimes people are talking to health coaches about these things, which this is pretty heavy stuff. So, try to find someone that actually can answer your questions with these things, because what can happen is you can end up getting a lot of um, snapshots, right? So and also there's a lot of information. The body is very complicated. So you've done some testing, right? So you go to your doctor, you get into your doctor and like, I'm not right. Something's right. And something's wrong with my rhythms, right? And I'm pretty sure my hormones are off. Um, you get your blood work done and they're like, okay, yeah, let's test your blood work. So you get your blood work done and then it's like, oh yeah, everything looks fine. It's fine. It's all in the reference ranges, right? Remember, reference ranges are built on averages and not on what's optimal. And what's optimal in hormone therapy is even more complicated, sorry to say, but unless you're working with the right person and they understand what's going on with you and what your goals are. So you can actually think about that. Your hormone levels can actually dictate your vitality. That's pretty cool. And remember too, reference ranges are just based on the people who take the tests. And so they are not all about optimal. They're just population reference ranges. And I really can't say that enough because people have to hear that over and over and over again in order to realize, oh yeah, that information is almost useless. But it gives you a reference range, right? A range of understanding. The same with the blood work. You get this snapshot of your hormones, which I don't even test a lot of hormones, like the sex hormones for estrogen and progesterone. I don't use blood work, it's limited. So that's really important. Okay. And then, what happens when you go into those testings and you get some blood work done, like, oh, it's fine. So then you're actually, let's say you're actually not fine. You've kind of taken the wrong tests and you've been guided to the fact that everything looks fine. And then you're dismissed, right? And then what happens? You have to come up with another reason for why this is a problem. Now, is it stress? Yeah, kind of duh. Stress affects your hormones, right? Like, that's not an issue. Is it aging? Well, we know that the number of times you circle around the sun, your chronologic aging, can impact your metabolic aging. But we also know your metabolic aging doesn't have to depend on how old you are. Okay, and then my kind of hardest to hear from what someone tells me is it's in your head, right? So, okay, a little bit of a tangent, but you have someone who's like not figuring out your problem and then blaming it on you. Wow. That is like a double whammy as far as I'm concerned, right? You have to be believed, you have to recognize that there's a problem, And you also have to recognize sometimes that if you do something and it's not the answer, right? If you're not finding the answer in your blood work, you have to keep looking for the problem. So please recognize that. All right. Um, okay, so then what do I find is people will come to me in my clinic, right? And they'll be like, I did this test for my hormones or any number of other things, really. But today we're talking only about hormones. And, like for example, I did a test that looks at my free hormones. Okay. Um, and there's a lot of, alternative medicine labs that still give a limited picture, and so limited that you're actually missing critical information, right? And I kind of call myself the Goldilocks of labs. Not a ton of labs, not nothing, right? Labs help us gain insights. And I don't like to use labs that are not looking at a picture. Don't let us actually look at a picture. So I see sometimes people do saliva tests or they might do hair testing, and they might get this piece, but they don't even know what's going on with some of the more critical elements, right? So we don't, if you just get your estradiol checked, okay, that's your E2 or your total estrogen, you have l- so little information, it's almost useless. Then let's say you get your E1, E2, and E3 tested. So those are your subtypes of estrogen. Okay, well, a little more helpful, but cannot be the answer because you have to know how those estrogen subtypes are processed and broken down. And if you don't know that, you now might be gaining another problem, because sometimes people will actually do hormone replacement therapy or um, different therapies on the free hormone levels. And if you don't have the detox pathway, so that's your, it's 2, 4, and 6 OH, or 2, 4, and 16 OH estrogen metabolites. What's going on with glutathione levels? That's also part of your detox pathways. What's happening with your um, other pathways? So how do you are you using up too much B12 or folate, because you have so much estrogen that it needs to be metabolized? So you don't know any of these ideas. So the like, or a genetic marker that's really critical with your hormone processing, right? And so then what happens, like that's called CompT. So then what happens is you end up having not enough information, and you might just be adding estrogen or progesterone, but particularly estrogen, in a way that is a good idea, but it's not letting you see the whole picture, right? So a lot of what happens in the problems in our body is we might be deficient in something, and we might also not get it out of our system well enough. And this latter problem is so often ignored. So when you have a deficiency, let's say in estrogen, right? And so you get on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which I love. Okay. You're either driving a Maserati or you're driving a Pinto. And if you're on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and you are using it correctly, you will be in a Maserati. So I want to just say that, again, oftentimes people are like, oh, well, you're missing these hormones. Okay, take hormone therapy. Please do not do that. If you're missing these hormones, how are they being broken down? Okay, how are they also getting removed? So you have to look at both. All right, that's really important. And that's why I use a hormone test that has what I need to look at for a comprehension of estrogen pathways, for elimination, make sure cortisol rhythm is organized, make sure we look at all some of the nutrients, like vital nutrients that are part of these detoxification pathways. Because otherwise, if you're looking at some of these panels, but they're not comprehensive enough, right? So that's very important. And then the other thing you have to remember, excuse me, is that cheap shortcuts are super attractive, right? Like, I totally get it. Like, And I've been there before, totally been there, like, right? But ultimately, they're misleading. They lead to wasted time, wasted money, prolonged suffering. They're misguided, right? And they don't alter the progression of the problem, right? They don't get you on a good track. And I'm going through something right now, which is kind of small, but it's a really good example of um, cheaping out. So I'll just tell you, it doesn't have anything to do with hormones, but the idea is I have been going to a dentist because he's close, because my daughter goes to him, whatever. And um, I know I should be going to see a biologic dentist it's like an hour drive. It's no big deal, but just because this is so convenient, right? Well, I needed someone to have a consideration. I needed my dentist to have a certain consideration for what was going on. And they ended up creating a problem, which I probably wouldn't have if I'd gone to the biologic dentist and the considerate dentist originally, right? But I like, it's closer, it's cheap, probably cheaper, but not by much. And whatever. I don't really have a problem. But I didn't pick the best option. And now I have a problem that's been generated by this dentist. And now I have to go to, luckily, right? It's kind of pushed me to say, okay, I'm never messing with my health in this way again. My oral health or any other health, I'm going to who I need to see to help me get better, right? And I'm definitely sure that you can agree that working on your health is already hard enough. And if you shortcut the testing and you shortcut the services, you shortcut the truth, and it causes a lot more suffering. Okay. So, of course, I want to tell you there's always my training, right? I was trained as a conventional OB-GYN, like super conventional. And I guess that was really good because it was in stark contrast to my bringing up in holistic health, right? My mother, hospice nurse, trained and mentored by Dr. Gladys McGarry, the American Holistic Medical Association co founder, like really beautiful experiences in holistic training before and as I was going to med school. So then I'm like, oh, OB-GYN, like, of course, women, amazing. So I went, and I didn't know that there's kind of a range, but there's still this foundation of conventional training. So I was like a stark wake up. And that was really, I guess, in some, you can always learn, right? There's always the blessing. But this idea of like being trained and hearing these messages, I mean, it just such a stark contrast to my original training, like believe people and do a greater good and always search for a truth, right? And this was like, this is the answer. And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm in conventional training. This is how I'm learning kind of the foundations, right? I'm in med school. They're talking almost nothing about hormone therapy in med school. So remember that, because doctors who go to medical school don't really learn hormone therapy or hormone, okay, or women's health. It's such a tiny component. And then what happens is women's health is kind of siphoned off to OB-GYNs and family practice doctors. So not your internal medicine doctors who practice primary care, and then not a whole bunch of other specialists, right? Urology is very little GYN, very little about women's health. And everybody else kind of is fellowship off of internal medicine. So they do not receive training. ER doctors don't receive training in women's health. They do kind of standard speculum exams in the ER, and that's that. So, looking at that, at least looking at what I was seeing conventionally and kind of understanding these ideas, I was seeing women be dismissed by standard labs, by low testing. Um, and then I was going into my own practice. And then people were coming to me with these tests, and I was like, but this is only part of the picture. This is only like tells you what E2 is and tells you what testosterone and progesterone are. I'm like, this is unhelpful. And so between, the minimal discussion on hormones in residency, and med school, and then coming into functional medicine for hormone therapy, um, and seeing, and also in my conventional training, seeing how hormones were discussed. And then I was like, that's this isn't this isn't the whole thing. And that really transformed my practice, and I think my patients' lives, for sure. For sure. So so anyway, then, what have I done in my practice for the last 7 years, right? I started with like a few tests. Obviously, people are like, well, this has a cost. And I'm like, mm, again, where's your progression, right? So if you're doing something to really help your hormones, you're changing your metabolic age. If you don't have the whole picture, you might be worsening that, particularly because hormones are so important to how you function and communicate through your whole body, that you want as a good a picture and comprehensive picture as possible. Okay. So, I start with your symptoms, right? Because symptoms tell us what numbers can't. History and is 75% of the whole picture, right? You have a PhD in you, super important, right? And then I run the right test. So I run the Dutch comprehensive test. And I don't look at any shortcuts. I don't run any other tests for hormone therapy. I don't feel like it's acceptable to do so, quite honestly. Now, I guess as always, there's a caveat. I do look at when new tests come onto the market, and I've stayed with Dutch because it's really nailing it, quite honestly. It's like I have looked at other tests as they come on the market because I think that's judicious, and the Dutch test is still the test that I prefer, by and large, because there's no shortcuts. It shows total levels, cortisol rhythm, estrogen, progesterone metabolites, detox and stress pathways, right? So look at your test if you've had a hormone test, okay? And look at, if you see the total levels, that's fine, but total levels for E1, E2, E3, okay? Progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, cortisol, okay? Even an AM cortisol is at least helpful. And then what are the metabolites, particularly estrogen metabolites? So do you see a section in your testing that says estrogen metabolites? And if you don't, that is a critical feature. And then you want to know how your pathways are working to process those estrogens and hormones. So you want to know your detox pathways. And if that is not clearly laid out on your test, then I would argue that you're not getting a full picture, and it's a shortcut test. So, um, okay. So again, kind of what you want to do, and what I like to do is start with your symptoms, run the test that I believe is the best, no shortcuts, connect the dots. So look at your test results with your lived experience to explain why you feel the way you do. And I do that all the time, and I walk my patients through that all the time. Okay? Because you can really get to the root cause when you start connecting the dots, putting the, I like to say, put the pieces, like you've got all the pieces, but you actually start putting them together, right? And that's really important. So you can really see that picture. And then you start looking at, more than random numbers. You have a roadmap for your hormone system. And that is power. And that is really critical. And that's been a foundational thing for my patients, is to look at what the numbers actually mean for your body. Okay. And then start looking at, once you have the knowledge of what's going on with you, what are some of the plans? What's the actions that you can take to support you? And obviously, we base those a lot in, the 5 pillars of health and well-being, right? So what you're eating, your movement, your stress, your sleep, your relationships, those are all really critical. But it's can and really, when you have a problem, it's those are part of it, but oftentimes it requires so much more. Okay. So those are kind of those 5 elements, right? Start with your symptoms, run the best test, okay? Connect the dots and or the puzzle pieces, which help you really get a framework, and then have an action plan. Okay. And this is why I call um, this episode the hormone test that can save your sanity. Because when you finally have like the puzzle pieces together, you stop guessing, you stop doubting yourself, right? Which is really a huge drain because you're ruminating on why don't I know? Why can't I figure this out? Ruminating is exhausting to the body. And so that's done. Stop guessing. You have the roadmap and you do the work. And I love that with my patients because there's so much personal control when you have the way to move forward, right? When you just now you have to do the work. Okay. So I highlighted this a little bit. Normal doesn't mean optimal. In fact, I don't even know what normal means, but let's just go to reference ranges. And then I won't even talk about the idea about, well, normal because doesn't really it's not really pertinent, right? But oftentimes you'll, oh, it's normal. It's fine. Your labs are good. It's like, come on, friend. Isn't this your profession? So anyway, you know your symptoms really matter. Even if someone tells you your labs are normal. Um, yeah. I mean, when my patients are not feeling good with their symptoms, and I do some lab tests and they're normal or they're like in the range or whatever, I'm like, okay, that leads me somewhere else in the algorithm, right? It doesn't mean you just stop. So don't stop. And better yet, use a test that's going to give you so much information that you're going to have an action plan from it. Okay. Because the wrong test and the wrong insights or failure of insights or lack of insights can really cost you years of searching. And the right test can give it back to you. Right? So don't settle for incomplete answers. And you matter. What you're saying matters, right? You're not broken. You've been looking at the wrong data. Okay. So this is the root cause hormone testing. It's everything from kit to education to interpretation videos to next steps. Right. So that because that's what I want to offer. That's what I've been offering in my clinic. That's what I've been able to organize into this and be able to give it to you, right? So you can start with the lab, and a lot of people like that. They want to start with the lab. They're like, that gives me a framework, and it's really true. In my practice, I often meet with people on their initial visit. I understand their history of what's going on, and I recommend these starting labs, right? So remember, if you're tired of being told you're fine or your labs look normal, and you know that this is not true, it's time to get the test that can save your sanity. Huh. Can't say that enough, right? I mean, because it's hard enough to look at all this information. And you don't have to do that either. Like I see people go into Google and they're like, and I'm fine with that. Like I love when my patients have more personal power and knowledge base. Some people are using Chat GPT, which again is based kind of as like um, it's like a predictive model. So it's kind of coalescing some information, which may not be very good information. You really can't rely on Google or chat of expertise, but you can definitely get some information so you can ask better questions, so you can know what you need to search for, right? Or at least give you something. So I see people going to Google University, and I'm totally cool with that, actually. I mean, I've actually been a doctor long enough where people that phrase wasn't used, right? When I started as a doctor, and now people are using it. And now in the last whatever several months, people are starting to use Chat GPT, and the answers should be inadequate, right? You should be working with a provider who gives you education so that Google University is providing you with kind of like some information, but not really the picture. So anyway, and you can lose your mind in Google and chat because they aren't about you, right? They there's not objective data there, and it's not putting the pieces together, right? Just giving you like a book, it's like giving you a book of information, which is helpful, right? But not really the application or the action plan. Okay. So I want you to keep your sanity, and I want you to look into this um, testing, root cause hormone testing, and I want you to compare the values of what you've been looking at and where you've been getting in your results, right? So thank you very much. Again, please click the bell and subscribe, um, so that I can get you some more information. And you can comment on this, like, um, what that means to kind of be spinning. If you've been spinning, you can write spinning. I mean, you've been like spinning and waiting for years, or, um, just questions you have. I'd love to see your comments and respond to those in the comments for YouTube, and of course Instagram as well. So look out for more. Have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll see you later.